Assalamu alaikum students. Today we are going to focus on the differences between spoken and written discourse. So today we are going to focus on object, scope, types of discourse, difference between spoken and written language on the basis of grammatical intricacy, lexical density, nominalization, explicitness, contextualization, spontaneity, repetition, hesitation, and redundancy. The objective of this lecture is that by the end of this lecture you will be able to understand the features of written language and spoken language. First, the object of discourse. Discourse refers to any utterance which is meaningful. Now, this meaning can be created through written text or through oral text, and sometimes can be a mixture of both. Like, for example, the internet chat in which we write some message, and sometimes we record our message as well. So discourse does not depend on the size of the text. It can be a very short, a single word, or it can be a lengthy one. The scope of discourse analysis is not basically discourse analysis is not a discipline which exists on its own. It is influenced by other disciplines and influence them as well. So it is a two-way process. It means it focuses on grammar, semantics, every other field, linguistic field as well. It has influence of other fields and it influences other fields as well. For this reason, discourse analysis examines spoken and written language or text from all sorts of different areas, that is medical, legal, advertising, and from all sort of perspectives, that is race, gender, power. So it means discourse analysis covers each and every kind of discourse, whether it is written or spoken. Discourse analysis is a number of practical applications as well. For example, in analyzing communication problems in medicines, psychotherapy, education, in analyzing written style. Now let's talk about the types of discourse. There are many ways to classify discourse in types. Number one is according to whether it is written or spoken. Secondly, according to the register, that is the level of formality that is used in written or spoken language. Number three, according to the genre, that is communicative purpose and style and audience. And number four is according to whether it is monologic, that is one person or one writer is there in the entire discourse, or dialogic, that is two or more participants are there in the discourse. When we talk about the difference between spoken or written language, then there are 7 important points which we can focus on. Number 1, grammatical intricacy. Number 2, lexical density. Number 3, nominalization. Number 4, explicitness. Number 5, contextualization. Number 6, spontaneity. Number 7, repetition and hesitation and redundancy. So number 1, let's talk about grammatical intricacy. Written discourse is more structurally complex and more elaborate than spoken discourse. In other words, we can say that sentences in spoken discourse are short and simple and can easily be understood because of their complexity or because of the simple structure, less complexity and structure, whereas they are longer and more complex in written discourse. Grammatically, spoken discourse has fewer subordinate clauses, fewer complement clauses, fewer sequence of prepositional phrases, fewer attributive adjectives, but more active verbs, more pronouns, more lexical repetition, and more first person reference. And opposite is the case with the written discourse. Second is lexical density, which refers to the ratio of content words, that is noun, verbs, adjectives and adverbs, to grammatical or functional words, that is pronoun, prepositions, articles within a clause. So spoken discourse is less lexically dense than written discourse. Content words tend to spread out over a number of clauses, whereas they seems to be tightly packed into individual clauses in written discourse. Structurally, spoken discourse is more fragmented, it contains more simple sentences and coordinate words, and but, so, because, etc., whereas written text exhibit a bewildering variety and richness of different structural form. Number three is nominalization, which refers to presenting actions and events as noun rather than as verbs. So basically, in written discourse has a high level of nominalization, that is more nouns are used than verbs, whereas written discourse tends to have longer noun groups than spoken discourse. In written language, highly pre-modified noun phrases are quite common. For example, a man who turned into a human torch 10 days ago after snoozing his locked car while smoking his pipe has died in hospital. So basically in this example, the first part, that is a man who turned into human torch 10 days ago after snoozing in his locked car, is basically pre-modified noun phrase. So long pre-modified noun phrases can be used in written discourse, whereas this is usually not the case in spoken discourse. Now, if we talk about explicitness, then writing is more explicit than speech. But this is not always true. It depends on the purpose of the text. A writer or a speaker can state something explicitly or infer it depending on many variables. Number five is contextualization, which refers to the extent knowledge of context is needed to interpret a text. Writing is more decontextualized than speech. Speech is more attached to context than writing because speech depends on a shared situation and background for interpretation. Whereas in written discourse, everything is explained within the text and usually it is less complex. If we talk about spontaneity, then spoken discourse lacks organization and is ungrammatical because it is spontaneous, whereas written discourse is more organized and grammatical. Spoken discourse contains more incomplete and formulated sentences. Topics can be changed, speakers may interrupt and overlap, whereas all these are not possible in written discourse because it is written in the written form. So there can be no interruption, there should be complete sentences, and there is less possibility of being ungrammatical. If we talk about repetition, hesitation and redundancy, then spoken discourse contains more repetitions, hesitations and redundancy because it is produced in real time. So there is a possibility that if one thing is not clear, the speaker might repeat that in some other words, or there can be hesitations as well. Spoken discourse has many pauses and fillers such as her, or you know, whereas written discourse can only be divided into chapters, sections, units, headings, subheadings, and quotations. There can be no repetition. Repetition is strictly not allowed in a written language or a written discourse, and there is no possibility of hesitation and redundancy in written discourse. Now, along with these, there are some more distinctions. Number one, spoken discourse has to be understood immediately, whereas written discourse can be referred to many times. Number two, spoken discourse uses gestures, body language, pitch, range, rhythm, pausing and phrasing. Written discourse has stress and intonation. So this is the basic difference between how the language is supported by other features. According to Brown and Yulee, we use speech largely for the establishment and maintenance of human relationship, or we can say that we use it for interaction for communication purpose, whereas we use written language for working out and transference of information. That is, the purpose is to transfer your information or your knowledge to other in the written form. Writing and speech sometimes are interrelated. That is, the doctor writes your symptoms while talking to the patient, or sometimes you write when you are talking on the telephone. So we can have written discourse that is intended to be spoken and a spoken language that is designed to be read. Or in simple words, we can say spoken in the written form or written in the spoken form. There are some marginal discourses as well, like for example, emails, SMS, texts, and chats, which belongs to both because they are somewhere in between. Both the genres are used here, written and spoken discourse. So that's all for today. Thank you so much.